Okay, let's unpack this. We have done deep dives into some really complex systems before, market mechanics, political history, the frontiers of tech.
Sure have.
But today, we are tackling something on a whole other level, an entire unifying worldview. We are plunging into the research and the philosophical framework of Robert Bauer.
The creator of the Nexus Nextcasts.
Exactly.
That's right. And our sources for this are, well, they're extensive. It's a synthesis of Bauer's interviews, his deep insights, all of his philosophical declarations, and it all centers around his system, which he calls Informatica.
And it is massive. It's this hugely ambitious framework that tries to connect, well, everything.
Everything. Ancient history, finance, quantum mechanics, the collapse of media, consciousness itself, it's all woven together.
So the mission for you listening to this is not to get overwhelmed by the sheer scope of it all.
Because you can, easily.
Right. The goal is to really extract the core, the fundamental nuts and bolts of this philosophy. We need to see the infrastructure underneath it all.
And that central idea of Informatica, it's incredibly bold. The core idea is that everything we experience, every single facet of our reality, is fundamentally information.
And that the universe itself is driven by two things: consciousness and frequency.
It's his theory of everything. He's basically asserting that the entire nature of reality is derived from these three interconnected pillars. And Bauer argues that if you don't understand this relationship, you can't make sense of the profound transformative chaos we're all seeing across every global system right now.
So let's start at the beginning then, the origin. How did Robert Bauer come to this massive, all-encompassing realization?
Well, the source material is really clear about this. It wasn't a slow academic buildup. It wasn't years of research in a lab.
Wow.
It was a singular, overwhelming event that happened about 4 years ago. He calls it a download in the middle of the night.
But download.
He describes it as this instantaneous flash of complete comprehension. The information was just there, so dense, so fully formed, that he had to act on it immediately. He said he couldn't sleep.
He had to just get it all out.
Had to transfer this entire framework connecting philosophy, physics, history onto paper right then and there. So it's presented less as a theory he came up with and more as a sudden gnosis, an enlightenment event.
And that origin story, it actually mirrors a part of the philosophy itself, which I'm sure we'll get to. This idea that sometimes the universe just skips the slow, linear path of learning and goes straight to realization.
It's a complete package deal, exactly. And importantly, Bauer is very explicit that Informatica is not derived from traditional science.
Or established philosophy.
Right. He sees it as a system based purely on observation, just observing the nature and the habits of reality, what he calls the truth.
And this observational approach led him to his core terminology, Informatica itself. He defines it as the metrics in the matrix.
And that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? It's not just a catchy phrase.
No, it's the whole architecture.
It is. The argument is that everything in the universe is information. And information, by its very nature, has to have distinction. It has to be quantifiable, defined mathematically or numerically.
But just having the raw information isn't enough to build a reality.
Exactly. That information has to be actively used to build metrics. The rules, the dimensions, the physics, the experiences, all the quantifiable boundaries that make up the reality we inhabit, which he calls the matrix.
So if I'm tracking this, information is like the raw code, and the metrics are the compiled program that we experience as solid or real.
That's a great way to put it. Everything is measured, everything is structured. Which brings us to the source of it all, consciousness.
The engine of the whole system.
The engine. In the Informatica framework, consciousness is everywhere. It's fundamental. It's absolutely necessary. Bauer states very clearly that consciousness is the one thing that if it didn't exist, reality itself would just blink out of existence.
It's that hard problem that all the sciences keep running into.
It is. The shared, singular experience that defies scientific definition. But he pushes past the idea that we just possess consciousness, like it's a feature.
We're not just vessels carrying it around.
No. We are individual, unique frequency stamps. We're signatures of that original, foundational, conscious energy. Each of us is a unique expression of this universal conscious field.
And that specialization is key to why the universe exists in the first place. Its need for novelty, for new experiences.
Exactly. And what drives this energy, this is where it gets really interesting. It's not the search for answers.
It's the search for questions. This is his philosophy of curiosity.
It's a really profound idea. He says that consciousness, at its core, is the act of wondering. of asking questions, of
Yeah.
recognizing what you don't know. It's that drive toward the unknown, the impulse to reach beyond the edge of what's understood.
It's not about having the answers.
No, it's about the sustained, active process of questioning.
I think the most challenging part of that concept, for me anyway, is when he calls curiosity a paradoxical survival trait.
Well, yeah, from a strictly biological, evolutionary standpoint, it makes zero sense.
It's inefficient.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Curiosity wastes energy. It makes you pause and look at something interesting when you should be running from a predator. It pulls your attention away from the basics, eating, fighting, reproducing.
Evolution should have selected against it.
Theoretically, yes. But he argues it's the very thing that drove hominids to become human. It's what drives innovation, exploration, the willingness to be vulnerable in the face of uncertainty.
So our greatest strength is an evolutionary flaw.
In a way. He says the deeper your willingness to ask, what if everything I've been told is wrong? The faster you grow, the faster you evolve consciously.
Wow. That completely reframes the whole idea of personal growth.
Yeah.
So if consciousness is the source of the why, then the how, the mechanism that manifests reality, is frequency.
This is the bridge from the non-physical to the physical. The materium, the world we experience as solid, is manifested by frequency and vibration.
This is where he hooks into quantum theory.
Right, which observes that at a fundamental level, everything is a wave. Nothing is truly solid until observation collapses that wave function. So since everything vibrates, everything has a frequency address. And that address determines its physical characteristics in our reality.
And this idea of frequency, it forces a direct challenge to one of the most bedrock principles of classical physics.
Oh, a big one. The law of conservation of energy and matter.
Gone.
If consciousness is always in motion, always seeking novelty, always creating, then energy cannot just be conserved. Bauer's argument is that energy is in constant creation.
So the universe isn't just shuffling the same deck of cards over and over.
It's always drawing new ones. The cosmos is always expanding, always getting bigger, because that reflects the inherent nature of creation itself, driven by consciousness. Conservation only applies to a closed system.
And the universe in this model is fundamentally an open, continuous system. Okay, so we have consciousness driving frequency, which creates the information that structures our reality. That's the machine. But how do we, as these individual consciousness stamps, process all of this? This leads us to the role of language.
Which he defines as the operating system of the mind.
The OS.
Yes. Language is made up of not just audible words, but of symbols and frequencies that actively structure and filter our experience of reality. And because language is our operating system, the words we choose consciously and unconsciously become absolutely critical.
They define the boundaries of our personal reality.
Exactly. If your language is manipulated, your perception of truth is manipulated. If you accept rigid, predefined definitions from outside yourself, you're literally restricting your own reality.
And this ties directly into the curated narrative that he says dominates the public sphere.
Absolutely. The conversation you have with yourself, that internal dialogue, that's the key to personal change. If you continuously use language rooted in victimhood or limitation, like I can't or it's impossible,
then that language literally structures the reality you experience.
it becomes your prison. Conversely, changing your language, your internal words, literally changes your operating system and therefore your personal metrics in the matrix.
So if our words are that critical, how do we build the right internal framework to process this overwhelming stream of information without just adopting someone else's OS?
That's the million-dollar question. And his answer is what he calls objective neutrality.
Objective neutrality.
It's the mental filter you need to sort through what he famously calls the tsunami of shit.
Right.
It is the mental posture that requires you to approach reality without the predetermined definitions or emotional biases imposed on you by external systems, media, education, family, whatever. You have to audit the information and, this is the hard part, remove yourself from the outcome.
Detach from the emotional trigger.
Completely. And this ties into the path to gnosis, to enlightenment. It's not a race. It's a very rigorous methodology.
Right, there's a ladder to it.
There is. He outlines this ascent that requires sustained effort. You start with empirical experience. What did you actually see, hear, feel?
Not when someone told you about it.
Exactly. That raw experience, when you reflect on it, leads to knowledge. Knowledge, when you synthesize it and connect the dots, leads to understanding. Understanding, applied consistently over time, gives you wisdom.
And wisdom finally can lead to enlightenment, to gnosis.
It's a path. But, as we noted at the start, sometimes the system just skips ahead.
The download in the middle of the night.
It proves that the universe sometimes just grants gnosis instantly, bypassing that messy linear accumulation of wisdom. But for most of us, the process of self-examination, critical thinking, and maintaining that objective neutrality in the face of constant information warfare is the only way to get to true understanding.
The goal is to stop accepting someone else's metrics and start building your own.
That's the entire game.
Okay, so now we take this very sophisticated philosophical tool set and we apply it to what's happening in the world right now. Bauer sees the current chaos. I mean, the political upheaval, the institutional breakdown, the cultural friction. He doesn't see it as collapse.
No, he calls it transformative disruption. And the language he uses to describe what's happening is very, very specific.
He introduces the term knowledge apocalypse.
Right. And it's so important to understand the original Greek etymology here. Apocalypse doesn't mean destruction or the end of the world.
It means the unveiling, the reveal.
Exactly. The knowledge apocalypse is the systematic, often brutal exposure of the fact that the foundational institutional narratives we've all been taught to rely on in education, medicine, media, finance are functionally bankrupt.
He also makes a point of rejecting the word disclosure, especially in certain communities. He prefers exposure.
He does, because disclosure, especially when you talk about things like UFOs and UAPs, carries decades of baggage. It suggests a controlled, curated drip feed of information.
Managed by the very groups who benefited from the secrecy in the first place.
Precisely. Exposure, on the other hand, covers everything. It's messy, it's painful, but it's the necessary organic process of the truth bubbling up from the ground, whether anyone wants it to or not. It's the moment the curtain is torn down on what he would call the bullshit.
And this exposure requires the deconstruction of all this broken infrastructure. He says we're currently dancing around the dumpster fire. But that bulldozer moment, that system collapse, is necessary before we can start rebuilding Earth 2.0.
And according to his sources, the most profound system in need of this total reboot is the one that's meant to prepare us for reality in the first place. Education.
Bauer is adamant that the current system is fundamentally broken. He doesn't call it education, he calls it schooling.
And that distinction is critical.
What's the difference for him?
Schooling, he argues, was historically designed to train workers for industrial systems. Its purpose was to teach people what to think, how to follow rules, and how to fit into predetermined roles.
To be a good cog in the machine.
A very good cog. Education, by contrast, is about teaching how to think, fostering critical engagement, logical analysis, philosophical depth. And because we've had schooling instead of education, we have a devastating lack of practical skill sets across multiple generations.
He gives some incredibly vivid examples of this failure.
He does. He talks about the systemic removal of essential classes like shop class, metalwork, mechanics.
Home economics even. Basic life skills.
Gone. He states that many people today couldn't even start a simple push mower, not because they aren't intelligent, but because the foundational understanding of mechanical systems, the very things that build our modern world, has been systematically removed.
All in favor of memorizing a predetermined curriculum that you forget a week after the test.
And this failure to encourage practical competence and critical thought is perfectly mirrored in the institution tasked with informing the public, what he calls legacy media.
Right. In the Informatica framework, media is the central transmission mechanism for the curated narrative.
And the key question is, who's doing the curating? Bauer points to what he calls a noisy minority.
This minority, whether they're motivated by ideology or profit or both, they control the volume and the framing of the information.
And the objective of this narrative is not to inform you. It's to bypass your critical thinking and trigger an immediate, often violent, emotional reaction.
And they achieve this through what he calls fear-based linguistics. Let's dig into that a little. How does that language actually function to maintain control?
By focusing on existential threats, on black and white tribalism, on constantly shifting goalposts, they keep the audience in a state of high emotional arousal. Fear, anger, resentment.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. And when your nervous system is in fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex, the seat of that objective neutrality we were talking about, of critical thought, it just shuts down. The information can then be absorbed without any audit.
And the sheer volume of information makes that audit almost impossible. He calls it a tsunami of information and a deluge of data.
It's an engineered overload. The intention is distraction. You can't possibly maintain objective neutrality when you feel like you're drowning in data.
So the solution isn't more data, it's a better filter.
A much more rigorous filter, a more disciplined approach. And this challenge is compounded by what he sees happening in the medical-industrial complex, which he also views as a critically broken system.
The sources are extremely critical of the allopathic model. They say it has too many holes and is fundamentally driven by money, not health.
Right. It leads to treating symptoms rather than root causes, which is a much more profitable business model at the end of the day.
This leads to some of the most controversial claims in the source material, especially around data integrity during the pandemic.
It does. Bauer's research points to anecdotal evidence suggesting that vital statistics, so data on things not related to the pandemic, like heart attacks, strokes, cancer, appeared to drop significantly during the height of the COVID-19 response.
Which makes no statistical sense.
None. The assertion is that these numbers were deliberately shifted or reclassified to fit a singular, focused agenda centered entirely on the pandemic narrative.
That's an extraordinary claim. If that's true, as the sources claim it is, it suggests a level of institutional alignment across global public health that is just staggering.
It speaks directly to the pervasive power of that curated narrative, the ability of the system to literally manipulate the metrics in the matrix. And beyond that, Bauer raises serious concerns about the long-term biological impact of post-pandemic sanitization levels.
How does that connect to the breakdown of systems?
He argues that the hypersanitization that was imposed everywhere is biologically dangerous, especially for children. Constant exposure to these high levels of sanitizers combined with less exposure to natural dirt and necessary bacteria.
It results in critically weakened and unprepared immune systems.
Which then creates a lifelong reliance on a medical system that is already, in his view, structurally flawed and profit-driven.
So we have these massive system failures in how we educate, how we inform, and how we heal. And all of this chaos, this transformative disruption, it all feeds into the grand political agendas.
Specifically, the push by organizations like the World Economic Forum, what he refers to as the deep state for initiatives like the Great Reset and the Green New Deal.
Yet Bauer's analysis of the outcome of these agendas is surprisingly optimistic.
Very. He asserts that this mission is failing every single day. And the reason is simple. They completely underestimated the power of collective consciousness.
Because, as he says, the people are wide awake.
Precisely. He suggests that the collective bullshit meter is just pegged into the red. They never anticipated this level of widespread awareness and resistance from the global population.
Which, thanks to independent research and what he calls new century media, is able to audit these incoming narratives in real time.
And that realization that their agenda is failing forces the narrative creators to prepare what he calls a cover story. They need an explanation for the breakdown that doesn't point back to their own manipulation.
So the current chaos is seen as this necessary but painful leveling process. The fire has to burn down the old, broken infrastructure.
The transformative disruption is the prerequisite for moving toward the decentralized conscious reality that he terms rebuilding Earth 2.0.
Okay, so if the old systems are breaking down, the philosophy of Informatica has to provide the foundation for the new ones. We're moving from deconstruction to construction.
Right, and that starts with technology, particularly the concept we currently call artificial intelligence. Bauer insists we're misnaming it.
He's adamant about this. The term artificial intelligence, he says, is fundamentally misleading.
It carries the emotional weight of replacement. It suggests that this technology is going to substitute human intelligence, make us obsolete.
Whereas he argues the correct term is assisted intelligence. AI, but with a different meaning.
Yes. The technology's true purpose is to augment and support human cognitive and physical abilities. It's a tool, not a substitute for the unique frequency stamp of human consciousness.
He also has a very critical assessment of where AI is right now, arguing it's flawed by its design limitations.
He calls the current versions of AI a sophisticated static content interrogator.
A static content interrogator.
It's limited to analyzing, sorting, and regurgitating content that already exists, content that was created by human consciousness. It can't genuinely innovate. It can't look forward or look back in a truly original way because it lacks the one core component.
Logicness.
Right. And this ties back directly to the philosophy we talked about in part 1. If consciousness is fundamentally the act of wondering, of asking original questions,
then by definition, current AI cannot be conscious.
That's the key distinction. He says, under current physics, an AI system that just processes existing information and can't generate the frequency of genuine self-aware curiosity will never be conscious or sentient.
It can simulate, but it can't originate. It remains a tool.
An incredibly powerful tool for augmentation, assisted intelligence.
And this technological shift dovetails right into the inevitable change in how we manage value and trust. The digital financial transformation.
Bauer argues that the shift away from fiat currency, which is based entirely on trust in centralized entities, is not just likely, it's inevitable.
Which sets up what he calls a great big fight.
A huge one. On one side, you have the forces pushing for more entrenched, centralized financial control. This is primarily the development of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
Which is an attempt to just digitize the old system of control.
Exactly. It would grant institutions unprecedented visibility and control over every single individual transaction. On the other side, you have the emergence of a decentralized, trustless, and auditable system.
And this is driven by tokenization.
We should probably expand on what that means for you listening. Tokenization is the process of representing a real-world asset, your house, a piece of art, gold, even intellectual property, as a unique digital token on a blockchain.
Which makes that asset's ownership immutable, verifiable, and globally transferable without a middleman.
And that structural change has profound consequences for your relationship with your own money.
It allows you to become your own bank.
Effectively, yes. You manage and control your own tokenized assets directly. And since the ownership is verified on the blockchain, the need for intermediaries to grant you credit based on some perceived risk, it starts to diminish.
Which is why Bauer predicts that as this transformation unfolds, traditional credit cards will eventually just disappear.
They become obsolete. The verifiable, immutable nature of tokenized assets completely negates the risk model that credit cards are built on.
So if the centralized system is pushing CBDCs, what's the decentralized alternative that Bauer's research highlights?
The sources discuss the possibility of something called the quantum financial system, or QFS.
QFS.
It's described as a potential new architecture for global finance, intended to replace the old clunky systems like SWIFT. The QFS is envisioned as a fully transparent, incredibly quick, and integrated transactional system, maybe running on quantum computing architecture.
Which sounds like an ideal scenario, transparent, fast. But the key question Bauer raises is, who's running it?
And will it truly be run by the good guys?
That's the crux of the whole fight.
It is. The need is for a financial system where your information remains your own, where transactions are just and transparent, and that adheres to the principles of decentralization and immutability that protect your sovereignty as an individual. But the transition period is going to be marked by fierce resistance from the centralized forces.
And this whole economic and technological upheaval runs parallel to a monumental shift in how information itself is disseminated, the move away from legacy media and into new century media.
This is what Bauer and others on the Nexus Nextcast are actively building right now. New Century Media is all about independent content creators and researchers who approach information with passionate intellect.
It's driven by that genuine curiosity we talked about and a commitment to auditing the narratives that are being put forth by the legacy organization.
The role of the independent analyst is to use that objective neutrality to provide high-quality synthesized information that just doesn't fit the profit models or the narrative restrictions of the mainstream platforms.
And the final piece of this puzzle is making sure these independent creators actually maintain ownership and control over their work.
Which leads to the concept of the International Independent Content Creators Interchange, or ICCI.
How does the ICCI function in this framework?
The goal is to tokenize the content itself on the blockchain. So if you create a video, an article, a piece of research, it becomes a verifiable tokenized asset. This system gives you irrefutable proof of ownership and ensures that monetization flows directly to you, the creator.
Bypassing the centralized platforms that take a huge cut or control your distribution.
Exactly. And the sources specifically speculate about how existing platforms might adapt to this. They point to Elon Musk's transformation of X, formerly Twitter. Bauer suggests X could be a pioneer in this space, using cryptocurrency like Dogecoin for direct monetization. The platform would essentially evolve into the first fully digital, tokenized, monetized content platform where you, the creator, by tokenizing your work, maintain ownership and get immediate, transparent compensation for your frequency contribution to the global conversation.
So having explored the breakdown of the present and the potential future, let's pull the camera way, way back to look at deep history and the nature of the cosmos itself, because Informatica directly challenges established physics and geology.
It's a massive undertaking. Bauer finds these fundamental flaws in our standard cosmological models, starting with the very simple, widely accepted idea that space is a vacuum.
He questions the basic physics of it. If space is a truly empty void, a vacuum, how do planets and stars even exist within it? How can energy and matter interact without a medium to travel through?
The Informatica perspective argues that space is not a vacuum. We exist in space, and so everything we require, water, air, energy, the medium for frequency to be transmitted, has to be present within the space and the air we breathe.
So the cosmos is filled with an energetic, maybe a plasma-based medium, rather than just being an empty void.
And that view aligns perfectly with the principle of continuous creation, which also forms the basis of his geological challenge to continental drift. He rejects it entirely.
In favor of the expanding Earth theory.
Which is a major scientific divergence. Continental drift operates on the premise that the Earth's size is constant, with tectonic plates just sliding around over the mantle.
Yeah.
The expanding Earth theory, however, posits that the Earth is continually increasing in size, just like the rest of the cosmos, which is always expanding because of that constant creation of energy.
So if the Earth is expanding, what's the engine driving it?
The sources suggest the Earth's core isn't a molten iron ball, it's a plasma core. And plasma, being highly energetic and always in motion, continually expands and creates more of itself.
So this constant internal generation of mass and energy causes the Earth's crust to fracture and grow.
Exactly. The visual evidence that Bauer and others cite is that if you mathematically reverse the expansion, all the continents fit together perfectly onto a much smaller sphere. And you don't need the subduction zones that plate tectonics requires to explain where the crust goes.
Which is a major challenge to the established model. If the core premise of the Earth's inner physics is wrong, how does that change our understanding of something like climate change?
Bauer tackles that head-on. He uses the specific example of the melting of Western Antarctica. The established science attributes the melt to global warming.
But the Informatica sources say the primary driver is internal. It's geological activity.
He points out there are 6 active volcanoes under Western Antarctica.
6.
Correct. The sources claim that 3 of them are currently active. So you have magma activity happening underneath a 2-mile-thick ice sheet. The heat release is melting the ice from the bottom up, causing the breakage and collapse of the ice shelves.
And this is presented as empirical data that challenges the singular narrative that it's all being caused by atmospheric warming.
It suggests the planet is far more dynamic internally than we've been led to believe. And these geological insights connect to the overall concept of catastrophism and cycles.
Which is the opposite of the slow, gradual change model of uniformitarianism.
Right. The Informatica view of history is cyclical. The Earth and life on it are periodically reset by catastrophic cosmic and terrestrial events, massive volcanic activity, geomagnetic shifts, cometary impacts.
Uniformitarianism says gradual change is the main driver. Catastrophism insists that massive, rapid, and often violent resets are the historical norm.
And he emphasizes that ancient texts from all over the world aren't just myths, they're records of these events. He cites the Tunguska event in 1908, the comet over England in 562 AD, as modern and historical examples of these cosmic influences.
This cyclical view completely changes our perception of human antiquity. The current Holocene epoch, which started about 12,500 years ago, isn't seen as the beginning of complex civilization.
It's seen as a rebooting period after a global catastrophe, which suggests that human history extends much, much further back than our current academic models will allow.
And this expansion of history ties back to what he calls the ancient truth of existence, as observed by those pre-catastrophe civilizations.
Their cosmologies, no matter where you look in the world, they all share one fundamental thread. They viewed the world as conscious and alive. The plants were conscious, the stars were conscious, the earth was a living being.
The modern reductionist view that the world is just inorganic and mechanistic is seen as a profound philosophical error, a loss of wisdom.
And this brings us right back around to the power of our own consciousness, specifically the concept of non-local consciousness.
If everything is conscious and everything is frequency, then consciousness can't be confined to our physical bodies.
It must transcend our location. Consciousness, according to Bauer's framework, can and does move faster than the speed of light. And the empirical demonstrable method he focuses on for this is remote viewing, or RV.
So for you listening, if you're not familiar with the term, remote viewing is a controlled, structured psychic process. It was famously associated with government and military projects designed to gather information about distant or hidden targets. How does Bauer define it?
He describes it as putting a prompt into awareness. It's the process of using your analytical mind to provide a target, a coordinate, a concept, and then accessing the non-local conscious field to pull back sensory, descriptive, or conceptual information about that target.
It's presented not as magic, but as an innate human ability.
An innate but dormant characteristic. But the sources are very clear that while it's innate, it requires immense dedication and practice.
You have to have that objective neutrality in spades.
Absolutely. You have to be willing to get the data wrong thousands of times before the signal becomes clear enough to be reliable. It requires separating the analytical mind, the chatter, from your purely receptive awareness.
So finally, this understanding of consciousness, frequency, and non-local access, it fundamentally reframes how we view the whole UFO-UAP phenomenon.
It does. And Bauer is notably skeptical of the current disclosure push.
He views the modern disclosure movement as compromised. He asserts that 90% or more of the information being prepared for release is going to be false or misleading.
And he makes the powerful assertion that many of the UAPs and UFOs being tracked right now are actually ours, technology developed in black projects.
And they're being used as a great cover story.
A cover story for criminal or highly classified activities. It's designed to distract the public while they prepare the ground for a controlled narrative reveal.
So what about true interdimensional visitation?
If it occurs, it's explained entirely through frequency physics. If a craft or an entity has the ability to shift its frequency address, it can shift from one dimension or density to another.
And that ability to instantaneously shift frequency would explain two phenomena that are often reported in these encounters.
Shape-shifting.
And the telepathic navigation of the craft.
Explain that. If everything is frequency, then a rapid, precise shift in your frequency address would make you appear to change shape or just vanish from our perceivable range. And navigating a craft based on frequency wouldn't require physical controls. Telepathy becomes the ultimate instantaneous interface between the pilot's conscious frequency and the machine's frequency.
It's consciousness driving frequency to navigate the information metrics.
It all comes full circle. #tag outro.
Wow. This deep dive into Robert Bauer's Informatica is, well, it's a massive recalibration of how you filter reality. It demands that you adopt that position of objective neutrality just to process the sheer breadth of its claims.
It really does. But if you synthesize the essential connections, the core architecture is actually quite clear. Consciousness drives frequency, which manifests as measurable information.
And this information system, the metrics and the matrix, is currently overwhelmed by a transformative disruption. A knowledge apocalypse that's revealing that our institutional knowledge systems, from education to media to medicine, are fundamentally broken and biased.
Navigating this chaos, then, requires you, the individual, to shed the programming of schooling and the curated narrative. You have to rely instead on your own self-reflection and your own empirical experience.
The messy process of exposure, however ugly that leveling process is moving us toward decentralized systems, toward genuine content ownership, and ultimately toward a higher, more conscious vibration, the eventual Earth 2.0.
The sheer intensity of Bauer's synthesis demands that you engage in continuous self-examination. You have to audit the sources, not just of the world, but of your own mind, to figure out what resonates with you and what doesn't. So here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with, based on this whole framework.
If everything is frequency, and we are all unique frequency stamps of consciousness, constantly in motion and always searching for novelty, what does that imply about the nature of free will versus predetermined cycles?
And if creation is always moving and evolving consciously, what responsibility do you have to contribute your personal, unique frequency to the evolution of the whole? If karma, as Bauer frames it, is simply a conscious evolution lesson, how does your unique choice today contribute to the universal quest for growth? The universe is listening, and it wants to know what you, the unique frequency, will create next.